For the last quarter century of his life, my grandfather spent hours each day at his word processor, writing recollections and essays and articles. He'd been a doctor, but like many aging artists and writers, he turned to the page to make sense of the life that he'd lived. Every decade, he wrote a new version of his autobiography, hundreds of pages of translucent, onion-skinned remembrance. Some he mailed to me or my mother, but most sat in desk drawers or binders, unread, unappreciated. When he died, my mother arranged for some of his huge trove of writing to be added to the archives of the Leo Baeck Institute at the Center for Jewish History. Finally, my grandfather found his readers. My father spent the last decades of his life copying old master paintings in a spare bathroom at the back of his house in Oxford. And when he died, my sister Kinney offered the stacks of his canvases to his relatives. Some refused, some accepted one or two begrudgingly, and consigned them to basements or to the walls of guest rooms. When my first wife Patty died, I offered pieces from her collection of unique clothing and jewelry to her friends and her relatives, and ultimately to the Sisters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul thrift store. A few pieces still reside in my bedside drawer, waiting for Jack's children to be born. When my parents-in-law vacated their last house in Phoenix, we held on to some family photos and some Hummel figurines and a piano, and the rest of the contents filled two large dumpsters. Long before she died in Jerusalem, my grandmother left her garden in Lahore, a paradise of chrysanthemums, frangipani, and roses laid out like a Persian carpet. By the end, she lived far away, her hip broken and her memory mostly gone. And the garden, like so much else, belonged to strangers now. None of what they made, words, paintings, gardens, objects, was meant to last. But in the act of making, they expressed who they were. And so do I. At least once a month, I get an email from an aging reader asking what they should do with their accumulation of art and sketchbooks. Some ask if there's a museum that they could bequeath it to. And others say they don't want to draw anymore because it'll just be a chore for their heirs to bin it all. I look at my own shelves and shelves of sketchbooks, the boxes of writing in the garage, decades of memories and experiences, experiments and lessons, and I just shrug. Sure, I'll leave all this behind one day, but it's not going to be my problem. I like Swedish death planning and the Japanese tradition called shukatsu, or end-of-life planning, where people in their 60s begin curating and editing or even publicly exhibiting their life's work. Not to preserve it, but to say goodbye to it, joyfully, on their own terms. I imagine that when I die, somebody, maybe Jenny or Jack or even a stranger, will hold on to a sketchbook or two as a souvenir and then feel crappy and guilty for burning the rest. I hope they don't. Maybe I should leave them a note inserted between my sketchbooks, and I'll say, "Dear whoever has to clean up my studio, these sketchbooks and manuscripts have no value, but while I was alive, they brought me much richness. They taught me to learn something new every day, to take risks, to see the world, to understand myself better, and to play. But all these pages are just the byproducts of that experience, and like me, they will one day be ashes. Perhaps some of the pages will inspire you to make some art of your own, but if not, don't give it a second thought." We only get a few decades on this earth, and when we're gone, those who knew us firsthand will soon follow. That's not sad, it's life, and what we do with those decades is largely our own business. But if we can provide an example and share our experiences, perhaps we'll make a contribution to the generations to come. I learned more from my grandfather's example than I ever did from his written words. I learned to enjoy working, to have discipline, and to be resilient. And the thought of him at his desk each day, organizing his thoughts and struggling with a sentence, provokes me to do the same. I don't own any of my father's late canvases, but I inherited his pleasure in experimenting, in working and reworking an idea, in setting myself tasks and projects, in making art primarily for me. Patty's love of color and creativity, her generosity, and her wit live on and remind me to stay light, be imperfect, and have adventures. My grandmother's love of nature, her taste, her attention to detail inspire me more and more as I get older. Objects come and go, but the values and lessons that we receive from each other and then get to pass along in turn, those are our real treasures. And instead of worrying about burdening my heirs with stacks of self-portraits and drawings for my lunch, I keep creating every day, burning through art supplies and paper to make myself a better and happier person, to enjoy my life as much as I can. I hope whoever has to rent that inevitable dumpster may take that away with them too. I drew them for myself, and in the doing, I became myself, and that was always enough. I hope you found this helpful, and if you did, sign up for my free essays. I'll send you great advice like this every week. And subscribe to this channel. I put out new videos every week. And next, watch this.